No, Charmander, I'm not going to give you any poffins today. You attacked me. Yeah. I'm not entirely sure when we're going to start seeing some major news updates for Pokemon Sword and Shield, but I'm kinda guessing that we might have to wait until May before we get another major blowout, and then maybe from that point we'll start getting steady information about Pokemon Sword and Shield. Until then, we're probably just gonna have to live off rumors and speculation, maybe a couple teases here and there, but I'm not expecting any big major news updates. However, that isn't gonna stop me from speculating and theorizing about what we could see. And there are some things that I would like to see that I think at least have a decent chance of happening, so I'm going to be talking about some features and changes that I would like to see in Pokemon Sword and Shield. So just as a disclaimer though, I'm not going to talk about features or changes that are pretty much already deconfirmed. For example, I'm not going to talk about how I would like to see Pokemon Sword and Shield be open world, because from the trailer it seems fairly obvious that the game is not going to be open world. It also seems fairly obvious that random encounters are back, and Pokemon out in the overworld do not seem to be too likely, at least not in the same way we saw in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. That said, that doesn't mean I don't think there will be more Pokemon interactions, and it doesn't mean I don't think Pokemon Sword and Shield will be more open. So let's get into some of the features and changes I think we could see that I would also like to see. So the first one, I do think Pokemon Sword and Shield is going to be a bit more open than previous Pokemon games. If you look at the way the camera is set up, we can see a much more broader scope of the environment. We've never seen this much of the Pokemon environment from a single camera perspective before, so it does seem like Pokemon Sword and Shield is going to be a bit more expansive, and especially when you take a look at the map and you look at that giant lake area, it does look like you might be able to access this little train from the first town, getting to that red house just beyond the mountains, and that area may open up, and then eventually you'll get to the towns above, and it almost looks like you can kind of go about them in sort of kind of your own order. So I'm thinking this game may be a bit more open. You may be able to take alternative paths. You won't have to just go in one sort of linear path. You may actually have options. You may be able to challenge gyms in any sort of order you like. Maybe there'll be some sort of structure. Maybe you can only access the first 3, then the next 3, then the final 2. Maybe that's kind of how it works, but those first 3 you can do in any sort of order you'd like, then the second 3 the same way, and then the other 2 the same way, and maybe, depending on how many badges you have, the levels and forms of the Pokemon for each gym leader scale to however many badges you have. That way the difficulty will scale with that. I think that's a possibility, and based off the way the map is looking and based how the environment is looking, it does look, to me at least, that this game will not be as linear as previous Pokemon games, so I'm kind of excited about that. I think it's fairly likely, but we won't know until we get more information. Now, I mentioned that the gym leaders would be able to scale depending on how many badges you would have, and that would definitely help the game not to become super easy like Let's Go, for example. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee was very easy. It was designed to be easy. It was made more for the mainstream, more casual, even more than previous Pokemon games. But because of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I feel like that offers Game Freak the opportunity to go a bit more in the core direction and make the game a bit more challenging than previous Pokemon games. So I am kind of predicting and hoping that we will get a more challenging Pokemon game than previous entries. And I don't just mean harder than Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I mean even a bit harder than Sun and Moon, Black and White, you know, the mainline Pokemon games. In Pokemon Black and White 2, there technically was an additional harder difficulty, but you had to unlock it in a weird way. I would like to see a harder difficulty available from the get-go. It's a really easy thing to implement, but Game Freak never seems to do it, and I guess the reason for that is because they want the games to be more mainstream. But like I said before, and because of Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, I feel like Game Freak may be a bit more willing to make this Pokemon game a bit harder than previous ones. Am I saying it's going to be like Dark Souls or anything like that? No, not that hard, but I do think it could maybe be a bit more challenging than previous mainline entries. Now, when I'm talking about a more challenging game, I'm actually mostly thinking about the battles. It would be interesting to see if they could actually make some of the puzzles a bit more challenging, but I'm really focusing on the battles here. That's the main part of the game, and that's what I want Game Freak to really focus on here. And based off what we've seen of the game so far, I actually do think they are focusing on the battles, and they're going to make them a bit more spectacular. So I actually made a video not too long ago talking about the emphasis on stadium battles in Pokemon Sword and Shield. We see the trainer in the stadium, we see this logo around all of the gyms, and it seems to be associated with all the stadium battles, and this logo is also within the Japanese logos for Pokemon Sword and Shield. And if you look at the Japanese logos for previous Pokemon games, those logos had little signs for Z moves and Mega Evolution, implying a big gimmick for the game. And for Pokemon Sword and Shield, the stadium logo is on the Japanese logos, implying that this is going to be some sort of big gimmick for the game as well. I think there's going to be a big focus on stadium battles. Now, what does that mean? I think the battles are going to be in these bigger environments. They're going to be a bit more epic. Maybe they will actually try to sort of bring in some of that actual Pokemon Stadium like allure. I really liked how Pokemon Stadium back in the day made the battles feel a bit more epic and bigger. They may be going for that this time around as well. Maybe they'll even throw in an announcer. Another thing I would kind of like to see that I think is fairly likely, maybe not exactly in the way I'm thinking it, but I definitely think there's going to be some form of local multiplayer. Because the Switch is a hybrid console, they're going to want to take advantage of the system's features. For Pokemon Let's Go, they offered co-op play. For Pokemon Sword and Shield, I don't think they're just going to slap on co-op. I actually think they're going to offer a different kind of multiplayer mode. Maybe something that could resemble the rental battles from Pokemon Stadium. Pokemon Stadium was a pretty decent multiplayer game because you could battle with rental Pokemon against your friends on one system. They may offer a mode like that as well. Maybe that will actually entail rental Pokemon or just using the library of Pokemon you have caught or using Pokemon Bank, something along those lines. But it really wouldn't shock me if there was some sort of local multiplayer mode in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and if they sort of centered it around the stadium idea, even if it's not based off the stadium idea, because Pokemon Sword and Shield is on the Nintendo Switch and it's a hybrid console, and a big emphasis for the Switch is multiplayer. I do think they're going to have some form of multiplayer in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, I mentioned earlier on that there are no Pokemon roaming about in the overworld, and it seems like we're just getting wild encounters. But if you look at the Pokemon Sword and Shield trailer, while it does look like you just kind of run into the wild grass like previous Pokemon games, you actually see the trainer sneaking in. So maybe sneaking could be coming back. I think that's fairly likely. But I think it could maybe be a hint that we could be getting more interactive encounters. Maybe for the most part we'll just have our general sort of random encounters when you go into wild grass, but maybe they will have more Pokemon come out frequently out of the grass. You'll actually see the Pokemon model roam about, and we could interact with them in unique ways. Maybe they sort of get a bit more detailed as to how you go about catching it. Maybe you can throw an apple to get to it. Maybe you have to knock down on a tree. You know, kind of the things they sort of play with before, but make it a bit more interactive this time around. So I'm not saying that every Pokemon will be rolling about in the overworld. I think that's obviously not happening, but maybe the occasional Pokemon could come out of the wild grass, maybe one that's a bit more rare, a bit more aggressive, that's at a higher level, that you will kind of have to deal with. And what I'm talking about isn't something that they kind of haven't really dabbled with before. In previous Pokemon games, sometimes you see special rustling grass, or you'll see a Pokemon sort of erupting from the ground in a cave. They've already played around with this idea. I would like them to take it to another level and actually see the Pokemon moving around in the overworld so you can interact with it in different ways. They kind of did it like crazy in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee with a whole bunch of Pokemon. I'm just kind of hoping for the occasional one to come out and we can interact with them in different ways rather than just having to run up to them. Maybe you'll see more Snorlax or sleeping Pokemon. You'll have to play a Pokeflute, using Headbutt to knock Pokemon off trees, and then throwing apples to attract Pokemon that are hungry. Things like that, I think, could be possible and could be a nice way to sort of add another layer to the catching mechanics in Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, one more thing that I think is possible, and I would say I'm kind of 50-50 on it, is the chance of there being another region. So if we take a look at the map, it seems like we kind of have a good idea of where all the gyms are, but it seems like the 8th gym is that little pink gym at the top at the northernmost city, and normally you don't see a gym in the same city as the Elite Four, and usually the Elite Four aren't actually in the city, they're sort of separated from everything else. So if the Elite Four is in this city, it would be weird to see because it seems like it's actually in a city that you can explore along with the gym. I am thinking the Elite Four could be somewhere else, so either it's in some sort of an individual island, or it's in Kalos, which a lot of people have been theorizing, and there is this train on the left. It kind of makes sense. If you look at the maps, things do kind of line up, and France and Great Britain aren't too far from each other, so maybe we could be revisiting Kalos. Another interesting thing to consider, Koryue Station in Pokemon X and Y, where Kalos is, really had nothing there. It kind of just seemed like it was there for almost no reason, but it's also very close to the Elite Four. So what if that train on the left side in Galar takes you all the way down to Kalos, into Koryue Station in Kalos, and then you're really close to Elite Four, and you can basically just go there, or maybe there'll be some sort of trainer to guide you very quickly. But maybe that's how it will transition, and it will kind of be like a nod to Pokemon Silver and Gold, how both Johto and Kanto shared a border and the Elite Four was in the middle. Maybe this could kind of be a similar thing with the Elite Four in Kalos. Just a possibility, but I do think there's at least a decent chance that we can maybe get another region this time around. After all, this is the first mainline ground-up Pokemon game made for a home console, so I imagine Game Freak is going to be a bit more ambitious than previous Pokemon entries, so maybe a second region isn't so crazy. So to sum it all up, these are some of the things I think we can maybe see in Pokemon Sword and Shield that I also would like to see. Accessing badges in different orders. You'll be able to play the game at your own pace. Maybe we could also be seeing stadium battles, and maybe that could also even include local multiplayer battles with either rentals or just the Pokemon you've actually collected. I think we could actually be revisiting Kalos in this game potentially, or at least another island area like Battle Frontier, or maybe even just a smaller little region that includes the Elite Four. I think while there won't be too many overworld Pokemon, there will be more Pokemon that you may be able to interact with in the overworld occasionally, and there'll be more interactive encounters in terms of going about catching that particular Pokemon. And I think because Game Freak made a more casual, easier Pokemon game with Let's Go, they're going to be focusing on making this next Pokemon game a bit more challenging than previous mainline Pokemon games. So those are some of the changes and features I think we could maybe be seeing for Pokemon Sword and Shield. What do you guys think? Do you guys think these are spot on? Do you think they could be a little different? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. If you love Nintendo content, please make sure to subscribe. Leaving a like would be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you all really soon. Bye.